Well, that was a movie.
Hello and welcome back to Simon's Rants. I'm Simon. This is Carmen. He's from Deep Fried Thoughts podcast. You should check that out wherever you listen to podcasts. And today we are giving our first thoughts on The Bikeriders. It's a new film starring Austin Butler, Jodie Comer, and Tom Hardy. It was written and directed by Jeff Nichols and is based off of a book by the same name. In case you don't know what it is, it's a true life story about a biker gang called the Vandals that were in Chicago, and I believe it began in the 60s, like 63.
Yeah, early 60s. I think it said 63.
Something like that. Basically talking about the rise of biker gang culture, which was a new thing at the time, and how that eventually shifted into the more modern interpretation and, well, also the 70s version of what biker gangs looked like. So more of a drama than I would say like an action movie. I think maybe from the trailer I thought there was going to be a little bit more action in it, but it's much more of a character study, much more about the people and the situations they're going through. So I will defer first and foremost to the resident biker man. How did you feel about it?
Actually, the point you just made about it being less of an action film and more of a character study, I appreciated so much more than I would have had it been an action film. I expected to go in here rolling my eyes a lot.
Okay.
Being that I had ridden with gangs and I got an insider view of a lot of that stuff, and man, this movie brought back so many memories. They hit some things right on the head, and other things were just, a little bit, I won't even say off, just not my experience. But I really liked the route they went with it. I don't know the original material. I'm curious to read it because based on how accurate some of these little details were, it feels like they must have kept pretty close to it.
Yeah, I'm very curious about that as well. One of the biggest shocks to me, and we alluded to this a minute ago, was it felt awfully cleaned up in a lot of ways, and I don't know how accurate that is or not, because like I was mentioning at the beginning, we're seeing the evolution of biker gangs, and when they started out they weren't violent, they weren't rough and tough, they were kind of just guys hanging out for the sake of hanging out, and they all loved bikes, and it became more of the gang aspect later on when you had new younger generations coming in, and the veterans from Vietnam coming back with PTSD and drug usage and all this stuff infiltrating the gang. But I'm curious if I'm just way off, where I was just like, it just felt, at least for the first hour, awfully clean. Like everything felt so clean.
Yes. Yeah, but that was, I feel like that was very realistic.
Accurate,
that was absolutely accurate. You'll find that with a lot of the old gangs back in the day, or we know them as gangs now, like even Hell's Angels. Yeah. It was these were gangs started by guys who just wanted to ride. Sure. Who just wanted that open road life, that carefree life, and it becomes bigger than they can handle, and it usually becomes more violent. It reminds me so much of just people in general. Yeah. When you have an outside view of something and you're young, we've all been through that. If you're older, maybe you're still in that age, but in my 20s, I had something to prove. I thought I did. And anything that I was going into that I had a preconceived notion of, I wanted to bring that enough to shine through the rest. I always wanted to be more than what I thought I needed to be to proving yourself. It really doesn't need to be expanded on, but it was interesting watching that from the perspective of the older guys, and that was what I appreciated. It wasn't the new, there was a young guy they followed a lot. I was really glad that wasn't the story of following this young guy infiltrating in and the rest of the movie. But I really liked that it started out as that slow, we just want to ride, we just want to club, we're just this brotherhood of friends, and the rules are they're just there. Yeah, they're just whatever.
But there's also there's a loyalty and there's a respect for people that gets kind of lost in the later iterations of the gang. It almost kind of reminded me of like rappers, where it's like there used to be a code of ethics with like how you treat each other, and there was gang violence and stuff, but there was like rules you follow, and then the younger generation came along and I feel like ruined everything. There's no respect, there's no and I sound like such an old head saying that, but like that's kind of the perspective of where we're coming from, where it's just like this movie did a really good job of pissing me off at the younger kids. It's just like, it really gets you going where you're like, man, there was like a culture here and it stood for something, and it got ruined, in a lot of ways, and that's a shame. Getting off that topic, though, because I feel like we can go more in depth with that, and spoilers just go more baseline view of the movie, review of the movie. The cast is definitely very well-known actors. I already mentioned Tom Hardy, Austin Butler, Jodie Comer. I'm forgetting his real name, but Daryl Dixon, Norman Reedus. He's in it. And so it's big name actors, a lot of people you recognize. I don't know how you feel about him. I am not a fan of Austin Butler, though, and I feel like he still has yet to lose the Elvis voice, so that kind of is very frustrating to me. Also, I feel like, once again, I'll defer to you as a bike rider, it looked like he learned how to ride a motorcycle for this movie, was the vibe I got from him.
You know what? I didn't really pay attention to too much of the way people, like, as far as riding goes. I thought of him more of, like, they were trying to portray him like James Dean would have been back in the day.
Yeah.
I got James Dean vibes every time he was on, and I thought that was kind of a cool approach, and it kind of brought me back to an era that I missed.
Yeah. We're not that old.
Yeah, but it's still before our time, right? I only know him by posters and know he died very young, but that was the vibe I got from him. But I think more so what I was attracted to him was what they mentioned in the movie early on, which is just that he had the ability to just truly not care. Well, to appear to truly not care. We all know that everybody cares. It's just a matter of how well you hide it, right? So I feel like he portrayed that pretty well. It's funny, I forgot he was Elvis until you said that, but and now I can't unsee it.
I can't forget it. Every time I hear his voice, it's what
I can't unsee
it's
it.
what ruined Dune 2 for me too. I'm just like, he sounds like Elvis the whole time. But I will compliment Jodie Comer because I did not recognize her until her name came up in the credits. I didn't know it was her, and that when you do that as an actor, I feel like the biggest compliment you can give somebody is, I didn't know that was you. Obviously, you recognize Tom Hardy, but I enjoy Tom Hardy. I think he's always fun to watch. It's good to see him in like a serious movie again. It's been a while since he's been in anything other than Venom, really.
Yeah, I got a question for you, your thoughts on him specifically. And I've been watching a lot of his movies lately, starting with, getting the itch for him, watching Lawless. And I was like, man, I need more of these Tom Hardy movies. There's something about every one of his characters that is so similar and hard to distinguish.
Yeah. The mumble.
There's something about the way he carries himself, the attitude, and I don't want to. I love his movies. This was the first time where I got a tiny little glimpse of, or a tiny little bit of a feeling of like, I've seen this character before. He's just playing a different role.
Sure.
So I got a little bit of that, and I don't know if that's just me because I've watched a bunch of his movies recently, or if, man, I don't want to insult him, or I just wonder if he just doesn't, if he's not that wide ranged.
I think so. I think it's time to open the door. I'm not. You can open your door if you want. I don't think it's a lack of range for him. I think it's unfortunately become a bit of a typecast with him, because I was thinking that during the movie too, where I was like, I see his Al Capone in this role, I see his Lawless in this role, frankly I saw Robert De Niro. I saw him doing a little Robert De Niro in his voice there, and I was like, really? And so I was thinking, man, is he become a one-trick pony? And then I had to remind myself of all the great roles he has done, like compare his line delivery in like Inception, or The Dark Knight Rises playing Bane, or Bronson, which if you've ever seen Bronson, I think it's the best role of his career.
Bronson is so good,
and it's like
incredible.
So I know he's talented, and so with that I kind of just leave it to, I think it's a bit of a typecast. Unfortunately, he's got himself stuck in, for better or worse. He's kind of doing very similar roles right now, and maybe he's making them more similar than they could or should be. But I definitely don't think it's a lack of range. I think maybe it's just a rut.
What would you think his furthest, if you could, I don't know if you have something that pops in your mind of something that was very different from his normal character?
Bronson, absolutely. I think that's his most different role. It's
still like that rough and tumble, like grimy kind of character that I get.
Okay, in a way, sure, but I mean,
and he does it great. I'm not trashing him by any means. I love him.
I know people will shit on me even bringing up this movie because everybody hates it, but Star Trek Nemesis. It was like before he was known, and he played a clone, spoilers for an old movie, he played a cloned version of Picard that was the villain of the movie.
Oh, I don't remember.
And it's a very different role. And I think, honestly, unfortunately, with Hardy, is I feel like his career has been split into pre and post Bronson, because ever since he bulked up for Bronson, he's been playing these rough and tough guys. And whether it was Lawless, where he was massive for that too, or The Dark Knight Rises, where he was Bane, he's been typecast into these rough and tough roles. And also, he's been playing a lot of Italian guys lately, with Al Capone, with this guy, American Italian. And then for some reason, for whatever reason, they decided to make Eddie Brock have a New York, accent too. Yeah. So it's kind of this unfortunate pattern he's got into, where
he
Italian
also has
buff guy.
A face that if I saw a guy like that on the street, there's not a chance I would think that's a great guy. I would think right off the bat, he's got this very tough, mean, hardened look to him. A very old school, like Great Depression boxer, or like, I don't even know. He's got a very classic, tough guy look that you cannot get away from, and it's also what drew me to him at first. Yeah, and it still does. Yeah, but again, I don't want to make this all about Sure. And I'm not trashing. He did good. That was just one thing that took me out of the moment for a little bit when I kept seeing some of his other characters in the movie.
He's one of those actors where I enjoy him 90% of the time. I would say all the time, except for Capone, because Capone was a kind of a disaster all around. But I usually enjoy his performance. But whenever I do, I also understand why somebody wouldn't. Like, I really enjoy his Bane. Completely understand why somebody wouldn't. Frankly, I enjoy him in Venom for the way he does it in a cheesy way. I think it's hilarious. I like it. But I understand why somebody would hate it. And so whenever I see him, I'm like, I'm enjoying this. But if somebody said, "Oh, that wasn't good," I'd be like, I see why. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, but I always enjoy it. So even with this performance, I didn't think it was his best. I didn't think it was Capone either. I didn't think it was his worst. I just thought it was, like I said, unfortunately a little similar to some stuff he's done before, but I'm just happy to see him again.
That's really how I feel in the end. What was the girl's name again that you mentioned?
Jodie Comer.
Okay, I didn't recognize her name or her.
I don't think you've seen her in anything yet.
But though. I was telling you before, she reminded me so much of Winona Ryder. From back in the day. It was her look, her mannerisms, the way that it was just a lot of her. I don't know if it was the character. I'm curious to see her in another film to see if I get that same vibe.
I'm curious to hear what the woman she was playing with sounded like on those recordings, because that accent was ridiculous.
I couldn't figure out where it was or what it was. Sometimes I thought it was Irish, like when they were talking in the laundromat in the beginning. I was like, I don't know if are they even from America.
Yeah, so it's like, point, to me it sounded like a horrible caricature, but maybe the lady really sounded like that, so I am refraining from having an opinion on that. I know this is stupid because it's just out of left field. This has nothing to do with the actual movie, but because I'm not an Austin Butler fan, and I'm not really a fan of most of the young actors anymore, I don't feel like there's a good crop of young actors right now. I was just longing for if this movie was 10 years ago and it was Shia LaBeouf playing that role, and that's like I said, nothing to do with the actual movie quality itself, but that was all I could think about.
Do you think that popped in your head because of the biker thing that he wore in Indiana Jones, that biker scene?
Oh, no, I don't. When was Shia LaBeouf in Indiana Jones? I have no idea what you're talking about.
You didn't do that, apparently.
No, I wrote that right out. No, I think I was thinking Lawless, honestly. Okay. I was just they were so good together in that movie.
I would have loved him in that movie.
Imagine if he was him together again, that would have been great. And I get it. They wanted a pretty boy, which is why they got Austin Butler. Shia LaBeouf is past his pretty boy stage. He can't really play a pretty boy anymore, I don't think.
Plus, I don't know how well he would have been received. I know you and I really like him. I think he's incredible, one of the best. And he really, hit that hammer or hit that nail in for me in Fury. Yeah. Where I was like, that's it. He's one of the best.
Yeah. I still think that was probably the first time I realized he could act.
Yeah. But based on the internet, I don't know how. I see a lot of people just absolutely trashing and hating him, and I never understood it. So I just wonder how he would have fared in this movie as far as the movie's success.
I get it. but I do love him, and I don't know. I don't know how much it would have affected it. This movie's kind of already had a rough go trying to even get released. Like, this movie, they were releasing trailers for this, like, beginning of last year, and it was just like they couldn't get distribution in place for it for some reason. So I don't know what the issue was. I haven't really looked into it, but yeah, there always seemed to be a tough sell for some reason. Maybe it's just like the Tom Hardy thing, people are over it, because I know with Capone, and that movie sucked, so that's part of why. But once again, Capone sat on a shelf for like 2 years before it got released, so I don't know, maybe it's not Tom Hardy at all, maybe it's just a coincidence. Venom's doing fine, you know? This movie, I think, would have benefited from having a stronger cast. Like, I think there's aspects of the cast I really enjoyed, like Tom Hardy. And part of that was the writing too. I felt like a lot of the character development was kind of shallow. I didn't really get invested in anybody but Tom Hardy's character.
Yeah, I did kind of get that feeling a little bit, especially with the Tom Hardy's like right-hand man.
Yeah,
because I felt like he was a bigger role than they really developed him like to be.
Yeah,
like they didn't go into him at all, and we'll talk more about that after spoilers. There's a reason why I wish they went into him more.
And I feel like we didn't get to know anybody at all. Like,
I gotta look up this name. I'm still listening.
Which guy? The right-hand man?
No, he was one of the dirty dude that was talking about wanting to go out to Vietnam. He's like, I really wanted to.
Oh, yeah, Michael Shannon, by the way, was in this movie.
He is one of, in my opinion, I would say, like, top 1% of 1% of actors.
Yeah.
Did you ever see Bug?
No.
Okay. If you like him at all, you need to see Bug.
Okay.
It's pretty much all set in a hotel room. It is a ridiculously well-acted film. Oh, he is the film.
Speaking
and
of,
I loved every second of him in this.
I've told you about this movie before, about bringing up best Tom Hardy and most different Tom Hardy performances, also talking about being confined to a single space. Lock, one of the earliest A24 films I ever saw, maybe the first one I saw before I knew what A24 was, is Tom Hardy in a car for 90 minutes. The premise is he's done work for the night, getting ready to go home. He gets a call from his mistress, finding out she is going into labor. It's his kid. So now he has to drive 90 minutes to the hospital to be with her, has to have that conversation with her on the phone, has to call his wife and explain what's going on, has to call his boss and explain why he won't be in work the next day. It's just 90 minutes of him having phone conversations in a car. And he makes that movie great. How?
That sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, how does that work? I don't know. But that's another, if you're looking for Tom Hardy acting not like that big macho guy, that's a great movie to check out too. Sorry to completely derail your point, but yeah, Michael Shannon's in the movie, so I guess that was the other actor that I really enjoyed. And
yeah, I didn't know that going into this. I didn't watch much. I saw a teaser a long time ago. It was probably last year.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I hope they do that well. And then when you sent me the trailer, I watched a few seconds of it, and I was like, I'm in.
Yeah. But as good as Michael Shannon's performance was, I wanted once again to know more about this character. We only got to know his character through one side conversation. I guess fair enough. He's not a main character or anything. He is a side character, so maybe that's all we needed was that one fireside conversation. But when we're not getting any in-depth look at any of the characters, even Tom Hardy's character, the only real character development I feel like we had was that one conversation when he was walking out the door with his wife. And that was a really cool moment, and it was 20 minutes from the end of the movie or something.
I actually liked the way they did that with his character, and I'll speak on that when we go past spoilers. It was something that really resonated with me.
Okay.
The mysterious, not developing Tom Hardy's character.
And I get that.
With his family.
And with his family, I didn't need to know anything really about his family at all. But and also, I guess, to be fair, I didn't need to know anything about him either. It's just when we don't know anything about anyone, I'm just pointing out everybody we don't know anything about, going we could have known about them, any of them, really. Even the girl who serves as the narrator of this movie, we have no idea who she was before all of this happened.
Yeah, I did want to know more about her family. Like, how her family felt about this. What was she leaving behind? What, for a girl to just jump into that lifestyle, I wanted to know why, because that's not a normal thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I watched part of a Hell's Angels documentary that was on, like, I don't know, HBO or something last year. I forget where it was. And instead of it being a movie, it was a real documentary. So you had interviews with the real people talking, and that was so fascinating. And the whole time I was hearing her talk about this stuff, I was like, I kind of would just rather hear the documentary again, As interesting as the ideas and the concepts were, it felt so shallow in comparison.
I think you're absolutely right.
I still would say I enjoyed this movie, but I felt like it could have been a lot more.
Yeah, I was feeling that throughout the whole thing. I kept wanting to pull my phone out because I was thinking to myself, not that I wanted it to end, how much time is left, because I'm really hoping that we're not skipping past all these things.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, is a good sign in general, because, I mean, it made me want more.
Yeah.
But I didn't get it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I checked my watch, you probably saw, because I felt like when the movie got as good as it was going to get, there was like a switch that was flipped around 40 minutes in. But that first 40 minutes was kind of a drag, where I'm like, I'm not, and maybe on a rewatch I would care more, but like, because I had high expectations about, like, gang violence and all this stuff happening, and then nothing happened for the first 40 minutes. So maybe on a rewatch I would care more about that section. But it wasn't until 40 minutes in that I felt like anything interesting really happened.
I wish they went a little harder into the first or second half.
Yeah.
I wish they would slide that scale of when it shifted a little bit in one or the other direction, and just go deeper into that one side. I would have preferred the beginning to be a little bit deeper, and then see the abrupt change and just kind of shatter everything we thought we were watching.
Yeah.
Where I feel like it didn't really happen like that. They tried to show how abruptly things changed, but I feel like we didn't get much context. It was just like, boom, and things are different now.
We were barely getting invested when things hit the fan, and so it was hard to really, feel anything. And so it was a fun observation, but I didn't feel a whole lot by the end of the movie, which was disappointing. But like I said, it wasn't bad. There were some good performances. Not all of the accents were great.
Just that one.
I'm not sure how accurate a lot of the accents were. Like I said, I feel like Tom Hardy was doing a little bit of a De Niro, which, come to think of it, that was another thing. Along with the Shia LaBeouf thing, the whole time I kept thinking, what if Scorsese made this, man? Because that was
we'd still be in there watching it
and enjoying it a lot more, probably, though.
For another hour.
Because one of the biggest things that, not only did I feel like it was shallow, it felt like it lacked authenticity. Like, it felt like people talking about being gangsters, not gangsters talking, if that makes sense. And maybe it was also the lack of R-rated violence. The movie's R-rated.
Okay, it is R-rated, because it did barely. Not feel like that until some moments. I was like, wait, how many times did they curse? What is this?
I was counting the F-bombs for a while, and eventually it does go above and beyond to be an R-rated movie. But from the first action moment, they're cutting away from any violence, and I was just like, I wanted something more visceral. And that was also disappointing to me. That's kind of part of what made Scorsese's films, for instance, feel so real and visceral. I'll use that word again. Just had the bluntness of the violence, and it just felt so real and authentic. And this movie, once again, it just felt a little too clean.
The only thing I would say to rebut that, and I don't know, but the thought I had to counter that during the film was, we're always Elvis was a big thing at one point for shaking his hips. Whatever a vulgar or, a crude type of individual was back then would be very different than what we would see today. So maybe just the outlaw lifestyle that they were living was already pushing those boundaries. You saw how much of a gentleman, or how much they cared about still being gentlemen in certain scenarios. It was just that classy respect, kind of like you see in the old gangster films. So that was the only other thing I could think of, where the fact that it went from a lot more peaceful and clean cut was to help showed the drastic difference later on. But I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching, for straws here.
I agree with that, but I also think there's a different thing in there where all I can say is it felt like Disney-ish, where it's like, for instance, okay, slight spoiler, but it doesn't matter. Austin Butler runs a stoplight, so some police come after him. And the big epic chase scene we get is he runs another red light where 2 cars are coming opposite directions, stopping the cops from getting him. And I'm like, that's Mighty Ducks. We're doing like the Mighty Ducks here, It's like I was all excited to be like, oh, let's see how he gets out of this situation, and then it's just catch that kid, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not.
That was a very real moment for me.
Oh, okay, yes, and I know you've had similar situations.
That was a very real moment for me.
But like, the stories I've heard you tell were so much more exciting than that.
Well, I'm telling them because, and I'm excited about telling them. Maybe they weren't excited about telling this story until the second half. Maybe they just wanted to get to the violence.
But to me,
no, I agree with you. Here's one thing I will say: like, my memories are definitely tainting the film to where there were moments that just brought back so many memories for me of just that time in my life, and I enjoyed it more than you might have. But I also was realistically watching the film and understanding that there was a lot of lackluster aspects to it, but it's something I definitely am excited to watch again and catch things that I missed while I was, daydreaming and reliving some things. But
like, it definitely wasn't a bad movie. Like, there was nothing bad about it. There just wasn't anything great about it either, I feel like, which is disappointing because I feel like it just had the potential to have so much greatness in it. But I mean, I'd still give it a positive rating. Not like a great rating, but probably something like a 6.5, maybe. I don't know how you're feeling.
Man, can I pick the same score as you?
Yeah.
Because 6 I feel like is a little too harsh, and 7 I don't think it deserves. So I'm gonna agree with you on that 6.5.
This is why because I know I won't copy who I'm reviewing it with. So usually I make the other person say there first because I know there's that temptation.
I was thinking
copy.
From walking over here, I'm like, I can't do 6, can't do 7.
So that's what we think spoiler free. We're gonna get into spoilers probably for not as long as last week, but we will talk about some spoilers. If you don't want anything spoiled, you should click away, go watch it, come back, and then we can talk about it then. Once again, don't forget to follow Deep Fried Thoughts Podcast wherever you find your podcasts. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.
See ya.
So, spoilers.
So one of the first moments that I really got captured by, and it was interesting watching it from the female's perspective, was that scene where she leaves the bar, and he comes out and just sits on the bike, because that was so realistic of like, they knew she wanted to be part of it and just wasn't ready to commit, and I love that whole setup. But that's not the part that really got me. When they're riding and they yell it out, take her on the freeway, and then they're on the freeway and she's kind of still not sure, do I love this, do I not, do I hate this, what am I doing out here? And then the roar of all the bikes coming up and surrounding them and just taking over, and it's just this feeling that I was there. I've been in that moment with someone on the back that's in the same situation, and you get a bunch of people coming up and just it's like you're totally just experiencing something you didn't realize was a part of life. And I remember my first time experiencing something like that, just as a rider. And maybe this sounds silly to you, watching, but it was just something very exhilarating about that. And watching that, I thought that was a really great way to show her transition of like, we all knew she liked it after that. Like there was no doubting when she showed up and her boyfriend was outside. There was no doubt in my mind that he was going to wait there until the boyfriend left and she was going to be with him. Like, and I know that maybe that was just easy to guess from the movie.
Sure.
But as far as that emotion, I feel like they captured it really well in that scene with all the bikes surrounding them.
I thought the shot specifically on the freeway was cool. I did think the part outside though was kind of cheesy.
With him waiting outside?
Not the waiting outside.
I thought that was very movie magic.
Yeah, the whole thing just felt very like, once again, like maybe Disney's not the right thing, but like grease. It felt greasy.
No, that's a great. Yeah.
Where like. She steps outside and he's on his bike smoking, and she's like, I don't know. And then everybody all comes and goes, get on the bike, and pushes her. I was like, what are we gonna break out into song now? Like, what is that? That felt silly. And then the overacting boyfriend was just really awful.
Yeah, I forgot about him until we brought that. I did not like him at all.
He was terrible. It's like he comes home, goes inside. Well, I don't want to deal with this shit anymore. Immediately has his bags leaving. Like, you already had those packed? Like, where were you keeping that? And it was so silly. And that was the thing that frustrated me. That
took me out a bit.
Moments of this movie were so cool, so authentic, so just real feeling. And then you had that Disney magic, and you're like, that's silly. We're not the Apple Dumpling Gang. Let's calm down now, And so there was a couple moments throughout where I'm like, I'm ready for like a gut punch, whether emotionally or just like, oh, this moment's gonna be powerful, like a visceral reaction to this, and then it very rarely landed. The one moment that did land for me the best, though, was the Tom Hardy part. We're in spoilers. The death. Where, first of all, it starts with that whole scene leading up to it's great. Because you just know, you got the vibe, he's dying. He's not coming home tonight. And his wife is like, you want to grab some eggs on your way home? And he's just like, yeah, sure, because he doesn't want to make anybody worry. He doesn't want to say anything.
Do you think inside that we were supposed to think that the character was knowing his fate as well?
I think
because I got that vibe.
Yeah, I think he knew.
I think he was ready.
He suspected, and ready is a good word, where he's just like, I'm too old for this. Yeah. And it's not like he wasn't going to try, but he's like, I can't keep up with these kids anymore. He goes to visit Kathy. And he's like kind of confessing to her how he's feeling, but she's not listening. She's thinking about it from her own perspective, because he's like, no matter how much you go out of your way to make a thing something, you put all your effort into it, try to make it something, give it everything you got, it just is what it is. It makes itself what it's going to be anyway. And she's like, you talking about my marriages, ha ha ha? And he's like, okay.
See, I took that as him talking about Benny.
I think it was about the gang in general, because he's coming to terms with the fact.
I didn't catch that.
He's coming to terms with the fact that, like, he even described the gang as being his family. Like, he loved it more than his family. It was like, this was his world, and his world had turned on him, and that's why he was like kind of just ready to die.
Yeah. Did you get the scene with Cockroach? Because I felt like there was something completely missing.
Yeah.
And that scene really pissed me off. Because I thought they were going to kill him, and my thought was, he's giving in to this younger generation.
Yeah.
And they wanted you to think that.
Yeah.
But then the setup, I was just like, there was no explanation.
They didn't explain it.
That was very dumb.
And that was part of the movie being shallow, was like, they don't explain stuff like that, where it's like, I mean, I always go back and forth with how much the filmmaker has to explain what is happening versus just showing it. But in a moment like that, I really go, well, what was that about? Because...
And what's the explanation we got? I took care of him.
Oh, that's what we're doing now? Yep. Okay. And I was like, what does that mean? And then he left forever. And I'm like, was he protecting him because he knew somebody was going to go after him? So if anybody's going to go after him, I'll be me, so I make sure he doesn't die. That's all I can assume, is that he did that so that his own gang wouldn't kill him, because, like, I took care of it, I beat him up, and so then nobody else would. But they didn't explain that. I am just assuming that, and that's the best explanation it can come up with. Anyway, back to the lead up once again. So he's telling Kathy everything, and she's completely missed it. And I really enjoyed that part too, because once it just like feeds into like the I'm too old for this shit kind of thing. And then he goes to the fight, and he's ready to fight, he is, but like, I don't know, even just the him walking up, it felt like, I'm too old for this. I got that vibe just from his walk up, as I'm too old for this, and then immediately got shot. And it was just such like a perfectly anticlimactic death. He doesn't react, doesn't do anything, he's just dead.
I got Departed vibes from that one.
And it was so upsetting, because all you want in the world is for this snotty-nosed brat to then get shot back or tortured or something awful to happen to him. Nope, he's just the guy in charge now. And that shows the death of, they call it like the golden era of motorcycles, but it's like the death of the respect and the law associated, because there's like there was like respect involved where you chose the weapons, you chose the place. All right, let's fight. Nobody's bringing knives to fist fights, nobody's bringing guns, and then he broke the rules. He shouldn't be in charge, but everybody just went along with it because now there are no rules.
He's the biggest, baddest.
And it's like, oh, come on. And it's just so frustrating, but like, you hate it, but you're supposed to.
Yeah.
And that's what made it work so well. And it's like, if the whole movie could have been that scene, this would have been like an 8. You know, I would have loved this movie, but I didn't feel like the rest of the movie had that level of a gut punch.
Seeing the way the young people came in, though, was one of the more authentic views. It's why I never joined any of the people I rode with. I'm not gonna say what gang, but one of the bigger ones. And for me, and this is not to be about me, just about the movie. Like for me, I was a ride along. I'd ride. I'd go to their picnics or their parties and their hangouts, and I was just there. I knew a little bit of what was going on. I understood like how everything was operating, but not all the details. Couldn't get anybody in trouble, but it was enough to be like, hey, this is what we're about. You understand? Like, do you want in? Yeah. And I was a ride along for a while, and just to hang around, but that was it. Because what I kept noticing is the young guys, and I felt the desire a little bit of wanting to be what I hated in them, was that every time I was around them, the young guys they wanted to pick fights, and it wasn't with other guys in the club. It was like we'd be at a bar, and they would just want to pick fights with some Joe Schmo that's there after work, just trying to relax. Yeah. And I was just like, these guys, I have no other word for it other than like, I felt like most of them were just absolutely bitch-made pussies that wanted to put something on that made them feel bigger and better about themselves or stronger. And they touched on that a little bit in the movie when they talked about why do the guys not wear their vests when they're alone. And that described to me to a T the young generation of bikers out there now, where it was just like they just wanted to be what everybody thought they were when they wore that, and not actually be themselves, as opposed to the early on where it was just some guys that wanted to ride.
Yeah, I think another great example they had was like showing, like, once again, the lack of loyalty, because Tom Hardy tricks the guy by saying, all right, if you leave your friends, I'll let you in the gang.
I loved that scene.
And then he's like, okay. And then he's like, no, fuck you. No, you're not in my gang. Yeah. Like, what kind of loser are you? You leave your friends for the gang? Fuck you.
Because that's what it was for them, though. Yeah. That's literally all it was. That was their family, and it was being loyal to one another. Yeah, I thought that was a great way to do it. And I actually didn't catch on to that initially, that he was doing that. I thought he presented himself in a way that was the only one he thought was worthy of it, but I appreciated it so much more with the route they went. Yeah. With it being a test.
You also, you even see it with, like, I don't even know where they were, but that viral video that happened a while back, and now the guy just got arrested for it, where it's just a biker gang and the dirt bike gangs have no respect for anybody. They're just, taking over.
Are you talking about when they just take over the streets? I've ridden in a few of those.
And then, and that's
it's
one
crazy,
thing.
But it gets out of hand. It got out of hand.
There was that the guy who kicked in the back window of the lady's car, and she had a baby in the car, and it's like, that was so uncalled for. It's so disrespectful. It's such a shitty bitch thing to do. And so it's like, once again, that's like, have some respect, because like that's the problem with the young folks.
They're just trying to be what they think they're supposed to be.
They're trying to be hard rather than actually being hardened by life.
Yes.
They're acting hard, and it's like, fuck you. You don't know what you're talking about, and it's so frustrating to see that. And so if this movie did one thing well, it was to really piss you off by showing that authentically. So there was a lot of things I wish it did better, but that thing, it absolutely nailed that aspect.
It did. Yeah, definitely a lot of things we talked about. I really think they could have went better routes. It probably makes more sense now after some of the things you mentioned of why this movie took so long to come out. I don't know if they were trying to change that or find a way to fix it in post-production, but I feel like at that point you know what movie you have and what you're going to be releasing.
Yeah, I think it was more of just trying to find an audience for it. Like, I think Disney was involved at one point of like...
Oh, really?
And it's like, they probably jumped on it because they're like, Tom Hardy, we got this, and then they just went, what are we going to do with this? Yeah. And so it kind of just sat around for a while until they could get somebody to take it off their hands. But yeah, no, like I said, it was fine. I had a good time. There was no point during this movie that I was wishing I wasn't watching the movie. There was definitely points, though, that I was like, I wish this movie was better. But I didn't regret my time watching it. I still enjoyed myself, so...
I'm excited for the book. I ordered it on the way over here.
Did you really?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. I think, once again, like I was talking about the Hell's Angels documentary, it's one of those things where I'm like, I'd rather just hear the actual story, I think, at this point, than watching a movie.
There was so much to touch on, and instead of just like digging into a couple different things, I feel like they gave everybody the little nostalgia. Like anybody that was into any aspect of bikes got a little nod to, hey, this one's for you, this one's for you, but nothing really deep into the culture of it.
Yeah, which that's a hard decision to make as a filmmaker. Is like, do you want to really dig into one or two things, or do you want to try and touch on everything? And my opinion is to always try and just focus on one or two things, because then you'll really nail something. And it's cool to be able to touch on everything, but my reaction to that is usually like everybody's then dissatisfied. Like, yeah, I wanted more of everything. It's worth watching, but just not in a theater, honestly. It's not a theater movie. I'm a big theater guy. I always recommend go to the movies and stuff, but like this one, I don't know, you could wait.
There was nothing made better by the big screen, the sound. Yeah. There was nothing.
Tom Hardy's luscious lips.
His luscious
on
lips.
The big screen.
He's a handsome man.
That's what we had to think. What do you guys think, though? If you've seen it, let me know in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to me and to his podcast. Yep. You want to talk about your podcast a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I'm on like a 2-month break right now, but where I'm working on getting a bunch of episodes. It's meaningful conversations with meaningful, real people. Yeah, sometimes we're just goofing around.
Sometimes they're robots.
But yeah, we're on YouTube, Rumble, and anywhere you listen. We're there. Spotify, Apple.
Amazon?
I say all of them because there's so many, and the feed is everywhere.
I know. I've done
there's
CD
some obscure
baby
ones.
Route. I know.
Yes. But pretty much Apple and Spotify. That's 99% of people. But yeah, it is on video and YouTube and Rumble as well. So please go check it out. Subscribe.
Twice.
Yeah.
I'll be on there a third time by the end of the year, probably.
I hope so. I've actually been meaning to talk to you about it. I'd like to get you on there.
All right. Bye, guys.
See you.